On March 22, 1959, 8 young cavers ventured into the shadows of the infamous Peak Cavern. Among them was 20-year-old Neil Moss, who had volunteered to be the first person to explore a newly discovered shaft. But once Neil ventured into the dark, suffocating shaft, he would never make it back out again. Unlucky breaks, unforeseen dangers, and a critical error transformed what should have been a straightforward rescue into a complicated mission. These are the final moments of the Peak Cavern accident. The day was March 22, 1959. A group of 8 cavers set their sights on Peak Cavern, a famous cave in Castleton, Derbyshire, England. Leading the group was Oscar Hackett Neil Moss. He was a young and eager philosophy student from Balliol College in Oxford. And although he was someone with a lot of interests, his passion for cave exploration was unmatched. On that day, Neil was in good company, being with members of the British Speleological Association, who were all thrilled about the day's expedition. Their mission was ambitious: to explore a passage about half a mile from the cave's entrance and examine a fissure in the side chamber discovered 2 weeks earlier. The journey into the cave was a challenge in itself, requiring a descent of around 1,000 feet below the ground through a maze of hidden caves. One of the first obstacles they faced was the notorious Mucky Duck section, a tight and wet-squeezed tunnel that often filled with water, especially after rain. Beyond this, they encountered the Boulder Passage, an area easier to navigate, but still filled with its own hurdles, requiring them to dodge and weave through a variety of natural barriers. Roughly 150 meters into their journey, the next challenge was a 3-meter climb on the north wall of the upper gallery. High above the muddy slope lay Pickering Passage, a tight, narrow path where they had to crawl on their knees and sometimes stretch out completely to wiggle through. This tricky route ended with a sharp bend and led to a muddy, water-filled pit. Above the eye hole, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through, marked their next obstacle. Past the thigh-deep muddy pool, they would find one of the cavern's most stunning spots, the stalagmite chamber, or, as it's known today, the moss chamber. Neil, already familiar with tales of this chamber and the intriguing narrow shaft discovered there, was excited to see it with his own eyes. Entering the cave was no walk in the park. It took over an hour of hard work, elbowing through tight spaces, crawling on all fours, and scaling walls. This wasn't your typical cave excursion. It was an intense adventure, 1,000 feet below the surface, demanding every ounce of their strength and stamina. When they finally reached the chamber, they paused to take in the incredible sight around them. But despite being completely worn out from their treacherous long journey, they were all drawn to the fissure in the ground, curious about where it might lead. The opening was just big enough for a single person to fit through, about 1 meter by 70 centimeters. Neil couldn't help but wonder what mysteries lay down that shaft, and all sorts of possibilities began to flood his mind. No one had ever gone all the way through it, but they guessed it was about 40 feet deep. The shaft started with a 12-foot drop, not quite straight down, then twisted like a corkscrew before leveling off into a 10-foot slope and ended with a final 18-foot drop. It was now 3:30 p.m. The team set up a special ladder designed for tight spots and hard-to-reach areas. Moss was the first to go down into the unknown, twisting and turning his way deeper into the earth. He didn't use any safety gear, such as securing himself with a bay, because he thought the tight space of the fissure would keep him from falling. But as we're about to discover, this was just the first critical error that day, setting the stage for Neil's tragic fate. Shortly after, Moss came across a tight corkscrew twist in the path that made it really tough to keep going. It was so cramped, it felt like squeezing into a giant twisty straw. But Moss kept going, feeling pretty good about getting through it, even though he couldn't see what was ahead. He kept talking to his friends above, telling them all was going okay. After getting past the corkscrew twist, Moss faced the rest of the shaft, but then things began to take a turn for the worse. Neil thought he could just find his way around any obstacles like before, but then he hit a huge problem, literally. It was a massive boulder blocking his way. He tried to figure out a way past it, but realized he couldn't move the rock in such a tight spot. Deciding to head back up, Moss suddenly realized he couldn't lift his legs high enough to climb the ladder. He got stuck in a narrow gap, only 18 inches across. Only slightly alarmed at the time, Moss shouted for help. However, even though his friends tried to pull him up, the ladder got stuck, trapping Moss even more. His calls for help echoed around the cave walls like whispers in a vast, empty cathedral. At first, his friends thought they could easily pull him out with some ropes, but it quickly became clear this wasn't going to be easy. Getting stuck like this happens in caving, but they now face a real challenge in rescuing Moss. A rope was sent down to help Neil climb out, but every attempt to pull him up failed as the ropes kept breaking against the sharp, rocky edges. At this point, Neil was certainly panicking. Trying to climb out, he got stuck right below the corkscrew twist of the shaft, unable to move his legs or arms enough to help himself push up. Realizing how serious things were, some of the cavers immediately left to get more help. Within hours, volunteers from all over England, along with the Royal Air Force, police, and the Navy, came to Peak Cavern, all wanting to help free Neil. But the rescue faced a number of unforeseen challenges. The air where Neil was trapped became severely polluted with carbon dioxide, making it much more difficult for him to breathe and think straight. He started acting weird, not understanding how bad his situation was, and even suggested that the rescuers take a break to eat. Attempts to reach him were dangerous, as the stale air made a number of rescuers nearly pass out. Finally, hours later, a volunteer managed to tie a rope around Neil, but pulling on it only made his breathing even worse. News of his trouble spread fast, bringing some of the best cavers with equipment in hopes to save him. They tried going down the narrow corkscrew path, but it was too tight and the air too polluted, making even the bravest cavers turn back. Struggling to breathe, the Royal Air Force flew in oxygen tanks, hoping to pump more oxygen into the air so Neil could be rescued. In the end, there wasn't much they could do. They kept pumping oxygen all night long, with plans to send a skilled caver down first thing in the morning. In the early morning of the second day, 18-year-old June Bailey arrived, ready to brave the depths. She suggested doing whatever it took to free him, including breaking Moss's collarbones to make enough room to pull him out. But even Bailey's bold attempts, along with those of other volunteers, were stopped abruptly by the dangerous gases that filled the cave. By Monday afternoon, nearly a full day after Moss had gone into the cave, the sound of his strained breathing was still audible, a stark reminder of the danger he was in. The rescue team pressed on, using compressed air cylinders in an attempt to clear the toxic air. But by now, everything was covered in mud, making it extremely difficult to see exactly where Moss was. All they could spot was a muddy obstruction deep below, with Moss firmly stuck, his arm wedged in a desperate bid for freedom. However, it was at this time an even more dangerous situation began to unfold. A constant downpour raised fears of flooding in the cave's lower regions, forcing the rescue team to temporarily retreat for safety. By the time the weather cleared, an RAF doctor had joined the effort. They went back in, hoping to hear the labored breathing of Moss once again. But this time was different. The rescue team was only met with silence. Neil Moss was pronounced dead on March 24th, 1959. It was a somber moment, marking the first time Dr. Hugh Kidd had declared someone dead without seeing them. Through this tragic time, Moss's father, Eric, stood by the entrance, eventually deciding his son should remain where he was, rather than risking more lives to retrieve the body. Unlike other caves with horrific tragedies, the shaft wasn't sealed with concrete, but rather sealed using loose rocks from the cave floor. Today, the buried shaft can still be seen in the cavern. It's a real eerie feeling, knowing that a body lies beneath that pile of rock. As a result, the chamber had been renamed to Moss Chamber, a tribute to the young caver's bravery.